everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we are going to begin on Thomas's Supra project, and the intro montage was one of me altering the compressor outlet. So I changed up the angle on this little cast elbow here, got us in a nice position to run the tubing downward and to start knocking out the intercooler tube, or intercooler tubing I should say. So today I'm going to focus my efforts on the hot side tube, get that squared away, and then I can move on to the cold side tube either today if I have time or in the next couple of days. So to start off, we need to come from the compressor outlet, go downward, and start making our way over to the intercooler inlet right here. So with all of the materials that Thomas provided here, this should be a fairly easy and fairly straightforward job to do. Thomas's hot side intercooler tubing is completed, aside from 1/8 NPT bung, which I will put on when I pull all this off to actually switch over to the Van Gen clamps. So you can see the compressor outlet there, the tube snakes down between the alternator and the frame rail, and then on the bottom side here, it comes through this little passageway in the sway bar, comes around to another Van Gen clamp, and then we have a short tube that comes over and goes into the intercooler inlet. And Thomas was kind enough to bring these Van Gen alignment clamps here, which they ended up being a really nice thing, and it was very nice to work with them and actually be able to hold these things in place appropriately. But with this tube done, or this whole side of the tubing done, the next order of business will be to move on to the cold side tubing. So with the car coming down, let's take a look at exactly the hand that I'm dealt to build this cold side tube. So it should be fairly straightforward, I'm suspecting, but I won't know until I actually get going on it. But with this radiator neck and little overflow nipple right here, it's fairly tight confines, at least up near the throttle body. And what I have here is a tight radius 3.5 inch bend, and then you can see right here the hole that the intercooler tubing will pass through. So we're going to be working backwards here, but it will come throttle body, tube down through the hole. And then on the bottom side here, if you guys can see the hole there, the tubing will come down, snake around, and make its way over here to the intercooler outlet. So it should be fairly straightforward. It'll be structured similarly to the hot side, where it'll be a two-piece tubing assembly as opposed to one piece, as there just won't be a way to easily, or at least for service, or for the sake of servicing the car, to make it all one piece. And these clamshell clamps do a pretty good job of holding everything together. I started today off with welding this elbow to this flange. So this is the beginning of the cold side intercooler tube, and I have to be cognizant of this little nipple fitting right here that goes over to Thomas's overflow. So confines are fairly tight, but I can make it work really without a whole lot of issue. So from this piece, the next piece that I need to work with is this guy right here. And this pie cut section is something that Thomas put together, and it fits pretty well in here. Slide the tube down through the hole and made up something along those lines. But I really want to use mandrel bends the whole way through this. I'm not a big fan of pie cuts, at least not at this point in my life and career. I've done a bunch of them in the past, and at this point I'd rather just work with mandrel bends. So I'm going to take this pie cut section that Thomas had made and transfer it over to one of these mandrel bent sections, cut a section out of this bend or another one that corresponds to this pie cut section, and then we'll use this tight radius 90 as Thomas had mocked it up and make everything work that way. First section of Thomas's cold side intercooler tubing is completed. So here is how everything sits, and I tried to keep this, like I said earlier, as tight to the throttle body as I could to allow for as much clearance to this coolant nipple as I could provide, and I was able to not have to use pie cuts. I put the 8th NPT bung that he requested to monitor both pre and post intercooler intake air temps. That's what the purpose of that bung is, and I'll have to put another one over on this tube somewhere when it comes back off, or when I swap over to the actual clamps. But at this point, we are from the throttle body down through the chassis here, and now I need to go from that tube outlet right here over to the intercooler outlet right there. So I'm hoping that that section was the hard part, and now the rest of it should be downhill at this point in time. So at this point I can raise the car up in the air and start figuring out what the tube structure needs to be to go from point A to point B. So with the wheel turned inward as much as I can see that we need to keep this tube up as high as we possibly can to keep it away from the tire. So hopefully this won't cause any undue issues, but we'll have to wait and see. Worst case, I can modify the outlet of that tube coming down through the chassis, but there's really only so much that I'll be able to do. So I guess without further ado, let's go ahead and get to putting this tube together. Well, Thomas's cold side intercooler tube is now completed, aside from the blow-off valve flange. So what we ended up with is this top side, which you guys have seen already. Comes out of the throttle body, snakes down around, goes through the chassis, and on the bottom side, coming through the chassis, snakes down around, and over to the intercooler. So I tried to make this as few pieces and as few welds as I possibly could, just to make it look a little bit cleaner. And one note that I want to make, if you pay attention to this lower tube right here, you'll see there's a little bit of straight section off of this bend right here, and on this side there's a little bit of a straight section off of this bend. So anytime that I'm dealing with a tube structure like this, I try to set it up like this, where I'm not cutting out of a bend, I'm just attaching straight to straight. And this is for the sake of A, making it easier to cut and mate the pieces of tubing together, and B, I think it looks a little bit cleaner and it looks a little bit more planned out, if you will. So obviously, I was still working with some weird complex cutting and grinding for the weld to this flange here, as well as this one right here. But overall, I'm very satisfied with this, very satisfied with what looks like simplicity, but for instances like this, simplicity ends up being complex. So at this point, the intercooler tubes are finished minus the blow-off valve flange and a second 8th NPT bung that needs to go on the hot side. So those will be a job not for today, but for tomorrow. So let me go rest and recuperate and get ready for that right now. And for you guys, we'll get started on that project, or that portion of the project, right now. Well, I'm about ready to go over and get back to work on Thomas's car, but I wanted to show you guys real quick if you can see, hopefully you can see the haze that is around here on the outside of the shop, and I guess everywhere around the area at this point in time. So that is a bit of smoke that's coming down from Canada with all the wildfires they have going on there, if you guys have kept up to date with all of that. So we are definitely getting some of the effects of that down here, and hopefully if any of you guys are up in Canada, and for anybody in Canada that is going through that, I really hope and wish the best for you. And I know it's something scary, and I've never personally gone through wildfire before, thankfully, but for those of you guys that are dealing with it, like I said, I hope the best for you. My heart goes out to you. Hopefully you, your loved ones, have made it through it all right, through it safely without losing a ton of your possessions or your homes or anything along those lines. But now it's time to get back to work on Thomas's car. And I sat and thought about this yesterday and determined that I am going to put some sort of a bracket on this cold side intercooler tube. So we have one point of rotation here, we have one here, and then we have one up at the throttle body. And I don't want to have this tube structure really be able to move around or do anything crazy or stupid, especially once it becomes pressurized and it wants to move around and everything else. The O-rings do a decent job of trying to keep everything in place, but I would be much happier and feel much better if I had some bracketry on these tubes to make sure that everything stays right where it needs to, right where I want it to. So there is one threaded boss right here, and I can probably find a second one somewhere else around here for this lower tube, and I can fasten those in place, make them kind of a fixed member, fixed piece of the vehicle, and that will still allow flex and movement, but it will prevent things from moving in ways that I don't want them to, and will prevent this whole intercooler tube system from going awry. Thomas's lower cold side intercooler tube now has this nifty little bracket. And in looking at this more, and now that the bracket is in place and bolted down and everything's fastened together, I don't think there is a need for a second one. So this Van-Gen connection right here serves to prevent the tube from rotating up or down, and this bracket prevents it from moving in and out from this frame rail right here. So I think that between this bracket and this Van-Gen right here, it should be pretty good, and I don't foresee there being any issues with the tube moving in ways that are undesirable. So with that in mind, I can now go ahead and locate the blow-off valve. And what Thomas has for the blow-off valve is this TurboSmart race port, and this is their Stealth series that is all black, as you can see. And I just need to find a location for it. And I think that its home is going to be in this air dam right here. Now I usually like to put them in these air dams, A, for ease of access, ease of service, and B, I think it looks cool when you look through the air dam and you can see the blow-off valve showing its beautiful face there. So I can go ahead, pull the blow-off valve off of this flange, get the flange tailored so it fits on the piece of tubing, as they typically need to be coped a little bit, the flanges that is, to fit on larger diameter tubing. Something that I have started doing with blow-off valve flanges is this. So you can see that the flange is obviously welded onto the tube, but there's no hole for it. So what I do is I weld the flange on without putting the hole in it first, and I put the hole in secondly. So the purpose of doing this and the benefit of it is you're not dealing with trying to weld on an edge of a thin piece of tubing. You can focus on getting a good weld put down and then go ahead and punch your hole secondly. And when you do it this way, you give yourself an enormous opportunity to make that port and make that hole very nice. So you punch the hole through with a hole saw like you normally would, and then you can go in with carbide burrs and with flap wheels or cartridge rolls or any type of sanding apparatus that you want to use, and you can make this a really nice, really smooth transition. So you can see that I have my flange welded on here, and now I'll go ahead, punch a hole saw hole in it, and then tailor the hole to suit the flange. Thomas's intercooler tubes are wrapped up, I guess aside from one final mounting tab, which I'll do off camera. But here is what we ended up with for all of this. You can see hot side tube with its new 8th NPT bung right there. Snakes down around, comes in through here, goes into the intercooler, and the mounting tab will need to go on this side, as you can see just how much movement that these vibrant clamps allow, and need to reel some of that in and control it a little bit. So I'll do similar to what I did on the cold side, just make a mounting tab that comes over to a little threaded tab right here on the chassis to hold this piece in place, and all will be well there. On the cold side, tube comes out, have another 8th NPT bung right here, goes down through the chassis hole over to this tube that houses the blow-off valve and our little mounting tab right down there, and then goes over into the intercooler. So this is all wrapped up, and like I said, aside from that one final mounting tab, all the aluminum work, at least the aluminum plumbing, is completed at this point in time. So I'm very happy with how all of this came out, and I hope Thomas will be as well. But it is time for me to get out of here for today, and I suspect it's about time to wrap this video up as well. So again, very happy with how this came out, and the next order of business will be to knock out all of the titanium mid-pipe work. So I'm very much looking forward to that. aluminum's cool, but I really like working in DC on the welder much more, and doing some titanium work is pretty close to the tip of the spear as far as things that I enjoy doing. But that will be in an upcoming video, and not in this one. So with that being said, let's go ahead and wrap this episode up. So thank you guys as always for tuning in, for watching me put this stuff together, put parts together for this project, for my Supras, for all the different things that we do on this channel. And these cars and doing this type of work, when I was a kid, this is what I dreamed of doing. And now to be able to do it in real time and in reality is really cool. And I'm very happy that you guys choose to spend your time coming along with me on this crazy wild journey. So from the bottom of my heart, I thank you guys very much for taking time out of your day to come along and spend it with me. But with all that being said, and without me waxing poetic any longer, that will be the end of this one. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.